Fellas, I was hanging out with this equalist. She was a 6. I'm giving her the business as only one. She get the business. I made sure she got the business the way you supposed to get the business on a first date. I'm a gentleman. She said, pimping, pimping, harder, deeper. I said, I'm giving you all 8, and I'm looking for more. Welcome, fellas, it's Pimpin' Time. I am your host, Po Pimpin', motherfuckers. Well, we got an interesting one today. The male gaze. I don't know if that's really a crock of shit, or if it had meaning at one time, because we understand at this present time, no meaning. This present era, the male gaze has lost all its significance if it was leaning toward us. If it was about the males, it's fully gone. Now, I'm not here to say the author was horrible or it was a bad idea. Actually, I like the term. It's a cool term. Why lie? It's actually one of those better terms you say, the male gaze. As he looks out into the wilderness at the young, fertile doe, as she frolics, just like it, has something to it. And when you look at the meaning behind it, structurally it's fine. There's really not a lot of complaints to it, especially when it was made back in the time period, 75, 77. So I don't have no problem with it itself, the author, or the term, or even its definition, and why do we have it? Like I said, once again, it's structurally is sound. It makes sense. It hits all the beats. The problem is current day. It lost all steam. I would say somewhere in the early, to mid 2010s, as social media peaked. Each time it peaked in one direction for its women's value, it went the other way for its men's value for us looking at it.
Define exactly what the so-called male gaze is. This term was coined by film critic Laura Mulvey in her 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema, where she describes the male gaze as the act of portraying women from a heterosexual male point of view that presents women as a sexual object there for the pleasure of the male viewer. She states that the male gaze is from 3 perspectives: the man behind the camera, the men in the scene, and the men watching the film. When women are shot from the perspective of the male gaze, they are dehumanized and viewed as only objects of desire, beauty, and sex appeal, losing all of their agency and humanity. It does not present a woman as real, but rather as the idealized, sexualized version of the woman that is in a typical heterosexual male's head.
I'm not trying to say I don't necessarily disagree with her, but it's hard for me to agree with all of this. Simply being, if you're behind the camera, isn't that your gaze? You're trying to give out what it is across to everyone. So in other words, if a woman's behind the camera, she's probably giving it from a female's perspective, depending on what the subject matter is. It's the same thing when a man does it, or for that matter, if it's a LGBT person that does it, or a person of color. It doesn't matter. Everyone has a particular gaze when they're behind the camera because they're trying to convey what their inspiration is across to you. They're trying to get their ideas and thoughts across to you. So I guess it's hard for me really to buy into the male gaze. I think the other part of it where it loses a lot of steam, especially in this day and age, the male gaze is no longer just a male gaze. We have to remember we have a pretty significant bi and lesbian representation. I think they have a gaze as well. If you're saying that they're looking at that men, they're putting men in positions to see women a certain kind of way, But don't lesbian and bi women look at the women the exact same way? If you're saying that you're looking at them from the legs down and slowly looking over their body, isn't it the same thing that you just said males do? So bi, lesbian, and male. I guess I'm confused. When one makes an argument that it's just a male gaze, because it's not anymore. I think the other part here is once women commodify this and put monetary value on them being looked at or likes, then they also made it much more complicated than it should be. Once again, there can't be an argument that, oh God, these guys stirring me, or is this male gaze? There is none of that anymore. You lost all that once you took on social media, made it a part of your life, likes, concerns, and confirmation, affirmation for how you look and what you're wearing. Once you made your body, it's your meal ticket, more or less. Once you made lonely fans and rushed out there and put your body for display, once you put yourself out there on Instathought, there is nothing else you can really say anymore. There is like a big argument here, or you have this great thing. So we finally taking over. Taking over what? What are you actually taking over? Nobody owns your body. Nobody never had your body. Name me the last time some guy owned some woman's body.
Having the men in the visual driver's seat subliminally puts men in a position of power over the women. And that's the whole point of this, really. In each of these cases, the female form serves men for visual pleasure, be it the filmmaker, the characters, or the audience. Now, you might argue that ultimately this is quite harmless, but consider the implications of having men decide what we do and don't look at. Ultimately, it's going to reinforce a patriarchal society.
Surface men for visual pleasure, not as rich. Subliminally puts men in charge over women. Have you seen porn? I'm talking about the amateur porn, the ones that the women are voluntarily making themselves, the ones they're promoting themselves. Have you seen that lately? That's been going on for a while. Have you seen a Twitch stream? The one where you go in here and play video games and watch other people play video games and you learn how to play or get through certain points, or are you just like kicking back, relaxing, watching other people who play better? Yeah, that is a streaming site now for mostly half-naked young girls who are trying to get young boys to put their credit cards on there, or their parents' credit cards. Implications of having men showing you something and doing what? What are they doing? Or what are the big bad men doing? What are the big bad faceless, nameless patriarchy is doing? Definitely in the past, old Hollywood definitely exploited everybody. Everybody was exploited. Heck, how many actual Native Americans were in any of these Cowboys and Indian movies? I mean, there's a problem there. How many people were played in blackface? Endless amounts. Heck, Julie Garland did it. And she's one of my favorites. So I don't want to go around and try and say, oh God, no, the big bad patriarchy, who I don't know what that is or looks like. And then somebody saying service for men's pleasure. That's what they do now. That's all they've been doing.
Men dream of women. Women dream of themselves being dreamt of. Men look at women. Women watch themselves being looked at.
That was John Berger. He has a lot of amazing work. He has a special he did on BBC back in 1972. It's a 4-part series, and it kind of critiques what they did with art. He's more like an art critic. And so you really need to check his out. It is actually phenomenal. And that's kind of where the male gaze came from originally. He came with the implications of it, but he used it in art. And then, of course, you know how it is. Somebody else came along and said, oh man, I like his idea. Let me run with it. I have a couple articles here I'm going to read to you This one here is called Gaze and Confused. It's from I guess a blog or a magazine called The Skinny, and this one's on the literary female gaze. Inspired with a conversation from author Siri, and I can't say her last name, and her current collection of essays. This was back in 2017. The concept of the male gaze is nothing new. Feminist critics in the 70s expanded on Berger's thesis by applying the male gaze to cinema. In her famous 1975 essay, Visual Pleasures in Narrative Cinema, Laura Mulvey described the male gaze as this scopolicate, as a male erotic pleasure is derived from voyeurism. In a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split into the active male and the passive female. The determining male gaze projects fantasies onto the female figure, or projects its fantasies onto the female figure. In a later essay, Mulvey pondered the relationship with the female spectator and has the culture universal male gaze. How is a heterosexual woman supposed to relate to the eroticization, and that's a word here, eroticization of the female body when watching a movie like Transformers? Is she playing the role of the fantasy male spectator, or as the camera pans over Megan Fox's eroticized body? Well, there's a lot there, but we're going to shorten it to 2 simple paragraphs. First one being, it's a guy thing. It's a biology thing. Men cannot be helped but be attracted to women. That's just kind of what they are. That's kind of the way the biology is made. That's how they wired. That's how they set up. They're born this way. No man runs around and teaches another man to be attracted to women. You either are or you aren't. That's the reason why guys are always constantly working, putting themselves together, trying to have more money, have more resources to campaign for women's attention. That's what they do. And so, yes, voyeurism, that's a thing. Because they like looking at beautiful women, young women, hot women. It depends on what kind of woman you're into. So, why is this a thing now? Didn't need to really make a whole big old thing about it, but they did, and that's cool. But I can tell you right now, I've been liking women since I was a little kid. I probably started somewhere around 12, 13. Seems like it hasn't stopped in all these years. But you know how it is. Gotta make something about something. I'm gonna give the females the benefit of the doubt on this whole Transformers thing. I think I'm gonna take a guess. Now, throw me out here, and at any point here, stop me. But I'm thinking that we're gonna give these ladies the benefit of the doubt that they were kicking back, looking at a movie about some fighting robots in a metropolitan city. I think once you were looking at that type of movie, anything goes and all things are on the table. That's just called me crazy. So having Megan Fox, who is now immortalized forever, good or bad, and I'm sure she'll take all the good that came out of this. She's immortalized forever. When she's long gone, pictures of that will still pop up. And that's not the worst thing to pop up on the internet. Now, as for my man Michael Bay, that's what he does. He blows up shit. He tapes women in the most objectifiable way he can. He makes billions of dollars. Nobody seems to be turning down his calls. I think everything was answered right there. We switched from cinema to art. And this is the same lady, but this is the gender gaze in art. In terms of sexism, all of this came out of the idea of the female nude, and the first person to really write well about this was John Berger, a man. Then it was picked up by the feminists and hugely elaborated on it, so that the idea is that the painting itself assumes a male viewer rather than a female viewer, and then the representation becomes the object of desire for this presumed fantasy spectator. Of course, women, especially heterosexual women, find themselves in different positions when it's relation to the nude, but it becomes pretty complicated because very often our cultural attitudes adopt the position of fantasy spectator, especially women. Women are much more flexible because when we had to be. So women just fall into the position of the male protagonist or any kind of male spectator. Now she's being interviewed. Here's the next question. I found this interesting. We call it the male gaze, but doesn't it necessarily have to be a man doing the looking? It can be a woman looking by occupying the same problematic power relationship. Oh, absolutely. And then what happens? What does it mean? It's complicated. That's all the answers we get from that, guys. That's it. There's nothing else to that answer. I got numbers and receipts. I went all in on studying this little thing here. I'm not going to go into all the number games of it because to me, this is just not interesting enough to go there. But if you have 1.8% of your people considered bi, women are bi by a lot, almost double the men. You have lesbians who like women, bi women who compete with women, and then you have men competing over the same women, and they all looking at the same curves and same body and same everything else. Then I don't know. Is it still really a gaze anymore? Is it really a man's gaze anymore? Or like, can I call it just a 50 Shades of Gaze? Because that's pretty much all we got here. There is not a male gaze anymore. The faster people stop calling it that, the easier it is. You can't have your cake and ice cream and eat it too. You're not going to have all the stuff. This isn't Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You don't get to dictate, oh, today it's going to be, we're going to put us into the male gaze because it's wrong. No, it doesn't work that way. You sat here, you want to be objectified, you want to be looked at, you want to be stared at. When people started posting their whole life on Facebook and coming up with stories and putting them in online and putting your Snapchats out and putting Instagrams out there, doing more filters to make yourself look better, and then to turn around and put more information and more pictures and pictures and pictures and pictures and more pictures and more videos and little tiny clips of yourself. And look at me wearing these leggings, these jeggings. Look at me wearing this cute little top that's hardly anything. Oh, look at me doing my butt exercises. You have no longer have rights to the word male gaze. You don't. You don't have rights to it. Once everybody started playing along with it and everybody became sentient to the idea, it's no longer usable. You need to give it up. Take the L, let it rest, and everybody agree on that, yeah, it was a thing in the past, which it was. You can look at many films that had that perspective. Because now we're using the POV shot. Everybody's using that shot. That's from whoever's view. Are they going to say, oh, that's from the male's view? Well, yeah, sure. It could be. It could be from a female's view. Hell, it could be from a bi lady's view. It could be a lesbian's view. Once again, it's 50 Shades of Grays, baby. All of it out there. You want it? You want the gaze? You can't have it both. You can be invisible, which nobody wants that. No woman wants to be invisible. The reason why everybody has 50,000 pictures and videos. Or you take the gaze, which you know that's what you really want. You live for these moments. That's all you're about. You're about that life. And when you ain't about that life no more, then you say stuff like this. Many feminists have recently described the female gaze as a response to the male gaze. How do you define the female gaze? There are two things. One, you have to learn the kind of mastery that whenever that assumes a male position, you're left to the story and you'll automatically adopt the position from the penny implies, which is the male universal gaze. So I think both those things happen. As a feminist position, it will be a position of ideally tremendous conscious where you understand what you're looking at. Sure. Do you think the consciousness, being aware that you are under universal male gaze, is the way to subvert it? So in the real world, just forgetting about pain for a minute, the idea of a young woman as life, living her life as an object of desire, of the male gaze. This is real. It's tough stuff. Every day you walk down the street, you have to be a performance. That's a hard thing to do. I'm an old lady now. The sort of age out there that, in another zone. But for young women, negotiating this is extremely difficult. Because you're totally re-sexualized as a young woman. I confess, there's a certain relief that rises with age because you're no longer being defined in that same way anymore. the cuteness or the lack of cuteness or the overt cuteness. I'm old and the sexualization of me has diminished, but you shouldn't have to get old to be treated like a model of respect.
So we know what the female gaze isn't. So what is it? It really is quite difficult to define, if I'm honest, because it's so much in its infancy. What we do know is it's being used as a device to force audiences to experience the world from the female perspective. And therefore, it's actually got a huge amount of power in terms of the feminist movement.
Is that what this really about? Is this really about just an equalist movement? Is this the game of tit and tat? If you notice anything about the equalism, and I'm talking about current equalism, everything is about going back and rewriting the past on everything that was ever done. And I don't have a problem with certain things, because certain things in history requires a little bit of tinkering. But every single thing, they don't have to have a rebuttal for. There's a male gaze, silly albeit, but kind of cool at the same time. Now we need a female gaze that no one can define, no one really understands. It needs to be time to cultivate it and research, and all the silliness that comes along with every time somebody says something like this. It's no different than somebody's running around saying, we need to study more women's cuckolding fantasies. Well, it's no different than this. We need to study to see if we can come up with a female gaze. No, it doesn't matter. Make enough films. That's all it requires. Make films. Make enough films. And the box office speaks for itself. If they're good films, guess who shows up? Everybody. If they're bad films, guess who shows up? Nobody. You know how many men that directed, produced, and written failures in movies? The list is forever. Forever. So we can quit running around using that pathetic excuse. That's not a good excuse. You know how many men failed in movies? We don't even know the numbers. Does it matter? No, it doesn't. They'll just try to make another one. And when that guy's washed up and washed out, he gone. They'll bring in somebody else to see if they can do a better job. Same thing with females. If you're good, you'll be here. You'll be making more movies. And you'll be talked about. If you're a scrub, guess what? You wash up and you're gone. Don't take it personal. Guys go through it every day. If you want to be one of the boys, and you want to get the gazies, or the lack of gazies, then get with the program. I've seen so many articles written on this particular subject. And all they keep talking about is what's happening in film and how women can get better at it and how they can have more power in it, and then they should be telling their stories. There's plenty of stories to tell. Hell, Hollywood just ran out if you haven't checked lately. They pretty dried up in the story department as far as I'm concerned. If all you can see is everybody looking forward to Marvel movies, a couple of DC movies, a few movies here and there. Come on, guys. Ladies, if you up, you got something to tell and it's interesting and good, people they'll watch it. They don't care who makes the movie, long as it's worth watching. If it's going to have an equalist point of view every single time in pop culture movies, I guarantee you it will fail. It will fail miserably. Nobody wants agendas unless that movie is particularly made that way. You have a movie of a person who makes a movie of a person of color because it's that type of movie and that's the way they want to make it, then everybody knows what they're getting into. But putting them into every type of superhero movie or putting them into any of your big mainstream movies, nobody wants to see Fast and Furious, the equalist of it. Nobody wants to see that movie. Nobody wants to see a blue-haired woman running around the movie unless she's hotter than an anime character, acting silly and lecturing people. If that's what your movies are going to be about, they're going to fail. Not because of me, but because as a whole, nobody wants to see that because it's boring. And when you got to pay 10, 12, 15, 20 bucks to go see a flick or look at it in your own home, nobody wants to waste their time. And with wasting time, I think I'm done with this. I'm out.
It's okay, baby. You cool. Do what you want. I give you your release. You're free.